or anything like before they also retire, right? So this guidelines that I shared today here are useful in many scenarios. So first we'll do a little comparison of Power Platform and Nintex. So my session is not totally focused on comparison of Power Platform and Nintex. It's more about like lessons learned from migration. It's not about comparisons of two platforms. The two platforms have their own capabilities and own strong areas. But this session would help you like the guidelines before you do the migration. What things you need to take care of, what things you need to think of before the migration and planning your migration. So session is less about comparison and more about like decision guidelines. So I'll also share what lessons that we learn while migrating from Nintex to Power Platform. Then I'll also share like pros and cons that we experienced while doing this migration. And what points would you need to consider when you are migrating from one tool to another, especially when it's like forms and workflow tools. So yeah, so this is the agenda for today. So a little introduction about me. I started my career being a developer and SharePoint developer, and then during my career I was a developer for 5 years, then solution architect for rest of year, and then a tech lead currently, and I'm also a partner at Soho Dragon India. I'm also a community super user at Power Automate community. So I like to help people with their issues, and while helping them with their issues, I do learn a lot from them. So it keeps me updated with what's going on with Power Platform. So this is my Twitter handle and my blog. If you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and check out my blog and post comments on my blog if you want to connect with me. All right, a lot about me, but I will also want to know about the audience here. Like, what background are you from? Are you an administrator? Are you a developer or a business user or a power user? I would love to learn about you so that I can design my session accordingly while I'm delivering the session. So if you could like put in chat window whether you are an administrator, power user, developer, or a business user, that would be really helpful for me. All right, looking forward to hear from you guys. All right, so a little overview of Power Platform and Nintex for cloud. So Power Platform, today I'm more covering about Power Apps and Power Automate. Power Platform also includes Power BI and Power Virtual Agents, but I'm more talking about Power Apps and Power Automate. So Power Apps is a tool for us to create applications, forms, or dashboards. So you can create a standalone app in the sense that it would work on itself. It would have a backend data source, and you don't need to like navigate away from your Power Apps app in order to do something. So you can create great apps with Power Apps. In the same way, Power Automate is a workflow engine. So if you want to like implement your business processes, you can use Power Automate. And then as a alternative to Power Apps, Nintex has their own product called Nintex Forms. Nintex Forms are used to create like independent forms, or if you are from SharePoint world, then Nintex is very famous in creating the SharePoint list forms. And same way, Power Automate is a workflow engine from Microsoft. Nintex has a workflow engine called Nintex Workflows to create workflows for your business processes. So what few similarities between Power Apps and Nintex Forms. So both tools are like you can use to create forms. And if you want to create forms, you can use the browser-based designers. Both the tools have browser-based designers for you to create the forms. With using both of the tools, you can create really dynamic, with complex logic, like responsive, attractive, and powerful user interface for your forms and applications. You can connect to various applications and tools like Dropbox or like any Office 365 product like Teams or Azure. So a lot of external tools you can connect with using both the platforms, and both the platforms work seamlessly with SharePoint list and libraries. So if your backend source is SharePoint, both the platforms would support that very seamlessly. Now, what are the differences between Power Apps and Nintex Form? So Power Apps is a cloud product available only in cloud. Nintex Forms is available in like SharePoint On-Prem as well as SharePoint Online, as well as an independent cloud product. So that's the main difference. If you're on-prem, you won't be able to use Power Apps. Power Apps uses like Excel formula-based kind of structure in order to implement complex logics in your applications and forms. Nintex is more about like configuring different properties of the forms and the controls from the UI and to design the form. So it's more of a business user friendly. For Power Apps, I think you will need a little more technical knowledge into like doing the formulas and all. So if you are like familiar with Excel, then that would help you. Then Power Apps, you can't write any JavaScript code in Power Apps, though you can like create external API and then create the connectors to call that API. So you can do custom connectors in that way, but you can't write the code in the form, which Nintex allows. You can write your custom JavaScript code in order to do some business logic on your forms. In terms of licensing, of course, when we are talking about different products, licensing is the most like thing you would talk about because it's after all the cost matters, right? So Power Apps has a per user license, or you can do a per app license. For Nintex Form, it's kind of a per app license. For example, if you purchase a license, then you can do 10 forms or 15 forms, kind of a licensing model. Then Power Apps, you can develop like full-fledged apps. As I mentioned that you won't be required to like navigate away from your Power App application as an user to do anything. You can develop such type of apps. But with Nintex, most of the times, like if you're working with SharePoint, then Nintex forms are like targeted being SharePoint list forms. So for the data and the data listings, it depends on the SharePoint lists. So that's quite a difference. So these are like some minor difference between both of these products. Then as we compared both the forms product, let's compare both of the workflow products. So Power Automate and Nintex Form. So both have browser-based designers. Both are used as a workflow engine to create workflows for your business processes. Both can connect to n number of like external applications and tools. Now, what are the differences? So the major difference, like if you are working with SharePoint on-prem or like SharePoint designer workflows, the main difference the users will see is how the approvals are implemented in Power Automate. Like approval tasks are stored in CDS, not in SharePoint, and Nintex workflow would like create SharePoint tasks to implement the approval. So that's a major difference. Here also Power Automate uses complex logic implementation using Excel-like formulas. And Nintex is more about drag and drop and configuring the actions rather than using formulas. And for Power Automate, the performance is based on licensing. So the better license you have, the better performance you get. And Nintex workflows, if we are referring to SharePoint-based workflows, then the performance is based on SharePoint workflow engine. So that's a overview basic difference between the Nintex workflow and Power Automate products. All right, so let me go through one by one of the lessons that we learned during the migration. I hope so far this session makes sense to you. If you have any questions, just post it in chat, and I would be happy to help you guys. All right. So my session today is not more about demos. So don't be disappointed that I don't have demos, but I have a lot of lessons learned to be shared with you. So it's more about talking today. So please give all your ears to this session, and I hope you learn a few things out of this, and you'll be able to implement it in your like migration projects. All right, so first, the lesson learned is determine the type of Power Apps based on the size and complexity of the application. So for example, you have an Infopart form or a Nintex form, and you are looking to like revamp that form. You might make a decision like, okay, I have this existing form. Now the new form that I'm doing, should I do in the same tool? Or should I like look for another tool which will help me to make this form better? So if you think about Power Apps in that term, in Power Apps you can do like three types of apps. One is like SharePoint list forms, another is Canvas app, and the last one is the model driven app. So if your form is like very basic form, not a lot of business logic on there, just simple and basic form, then I would suggest then you can do like SharePoint list forms. And when your data sits in SharePoint, especially in that case, you can do SharePoint list forms, customize the SharePoint list forms in Power App, and then you would be able to like in couple of hours you would be able to get your form running as a SharePoint list form. So that's a quick approach to do that when your data already is sitting in SharePoint and the form is really simple. If you want to like do a standalone app which has data sitting in SharePoint or data sitting in Azure, anything like that, then you can also do a Canvas app. Like Canvas app, I would do in a scenario where I have medium complexity of my application or a form. When the data structure is not so complex, and the form is medium complex, it can handle good logic in the form. But if the data structure is too complex, then I would go for model driven apps, because model driven apps are data first approach. So the model driven apps are like controlled by your data. So if the data structure is way too complex, then model driven app would make more sense. Or Canvas app, you can like develop beautiful apps with Canvas app. So you have a lot control on UI, and you can do a lot of customization in your app. For model driven app, your UI is driven by your data. So you don't have a lot of UI customization options there. But if you want to do like a beautiful looking app, then go for Canvas app with a medium complexity in terms of logic and data. So like this is the main point that you should think about, like how complex your form is, how complex the data structure is, and how complex the logic on the form is, based on which you can make a decision on what type of form you want to develop using Power Apps. So that's the first thing. Then the next thing, if you are from Infopath world or Nintex world, you would understand repeating table. What is repeating table? Repeating table is like user can add rows of data. For example, I want to add, like I'm doing an invoice form, and I have list of products to be added to the invoice. Then list of products would be like an repeating table for me. So in InfoPath world and in Nintex world, it is easy to implement repeating tables because they have their inbuilt control to implement repeating tables. So, but Power Automate does not have inbuilt repeating table control. However, you can like use gallery control in order to implement the repeating tables, and you'll have to add your own logic to add the rows and remove the rows. And then if you like, for example, once you have the repeating table implemented, then also you have to implement the logic to save the data to repeating tables. For example, you can save the data as JSON to the repeating table, to the data source. For example, I'll save all the data of repeating table as a JSON format and then store it in a SharePoint column, multi-line text column. So I'll have to you'll have to build the logic in your form to implement repeating tables. It's not so straightforward, but it's not like it's impossible. It is very flexible. Power Apps is flexible in terms of creating repeating table. It's just that you'll require that knowledge on how to do it, to understand the controls of Power Apps, understand those controls, how those controls works, and understand the properties of the controls and how to implement repeating table using those controls. So that's what you'll need to learn in order to do this, which you weren't required to learn in InfoPath and Index world. But still, we were able to implement it, so it's not like it's impossible. Then what next? So for Power Apps, we had a scenario where we had to like implement multiple attachments. So if you see here in the screenshot, I have like testing document attachments and business approval attachments. So we had this form tied to SharePoint data source. So if we use the Power Automate attachment control, then that would save the attachments to SharePoint list item attachment. But now, as we wanted user to attach different types of attachments. For example, they wanted to differentiate between two types of attachment, and you can't have properties of attachment. Like for example, if I'm attaching a document, how would I know whether that attachment is a testing document or whether that attachment is a business approval document, right? So if I attach the documents to a list item, then I won't be able to like differentiate between two types of attachment. So in that scenario, we had to like save the attachments to SharePoint document library, where we can like store the properties of the attachment, like metadata of the attachment, that whether this document we are saving in the library, whether that what is the type of that document, whether it is a testing document or business approval document. So that's why we were required to save the attachment to document library to store the metadata along. But now when we want to save document to library, Power Apps won't do it by itself, right? If I want Power Apps to do it by itself, it will just save the attachment to the list item and leave it there. But I won't be able to differentiate between the type of the document as per my business requirements. So what we had to do is we use the Power Apps attachment control, but we had to like call the Power Automate flow when the user attaches the document, and then that flow would save the document to the library and put the metadata of the document while the document is getting saved in the library. So Power Automate had to come in the picture. So we had to implement like custom logic in order to do that. So so that's the thing, like Power Apps does not have that ability to differentiate across attachments, as it just can, by default, it just stores the documents to list attachments. But If you want to like do a little more thing like I described here, you can use Power Automate flows in order to more implement complex logic and process. So I have a question here. Can we use document set to save documents using Power Automate? I think so. It should be able to. You should be able to do that. But I haven't done that before. But if I see logically, if I'm able to um, save the documents to SharePoint using Power Automate, then I think document set should also be possible. And if something is not possible from Power Automate actions that it provides, you can always use like REST API in Power Automate to implement something that is for which an action doesn't exist in Power Automate. I hope that makes sense. All right, so that was about saving attachment. So what we learned from here is if you want to save the attachments as a list item, just use the Power Automate, Power Apps attachment control, and it will do the job for you. But if you want to like implement more complex attachment logic, like different types of different sections of attachment, different type of attachment, store the metadata along with the attachment, then you store the documents in SharePoint library using Power Automate. So you can call a Power Automate flow from a button in Power Apps or from an event in Power Apps. So that's a really good example of Power Apps and Power Automate working together. So that was about attachment. Let's go to next slide. All right, so one of the things like we had the application that we implemented, like that we developed in Power Apps was a quite complex application. It had like 4 tabs and like hundreds of controls on all of the 4 tabs. So like we wanted the branding of the application to be like configured really easily. So we didn't wanted to like go to each control every time if we wanted to change any branding, like to change fonts or font sizes or change the colors. So that is why like I've referenced Apple Dunham video here. So you can, once you get the slides, you can refer to this video or just Google it out. You'll find it. But she had a really good idea of creating a branding screen for her app, from where you can configure the colors and the fonts, so that you don't have to like you configure this once for all the controls, so that you don't have if you want to change the branding or change the colors or the fonts, you don't have to again go to each control and change those properties. You do it just once and then you just change the settings from your branding screen. So we found this really cool and really helpful. So we also implemented this in our application, and it makes the maintenance of application really easy. And also, like when you are developing the app, the developers would be developing it, and then when it goes to like users and they do the testing, they would have feedback. Okay, this should look like this, and this should look like that. And implementing that feedback would be really easy for you if you have branding set up from the branding screen. So this is a good like implementation. If you're working on Power Apps, create a separate branding screen for you to implement it. Branding. All right, I do have a lot of questions, but I'll come to the questions in few minutes. All right, so one of the good thing you should do if you're a license, there are licensing requirements for creating environments, but if you have the license to create the environments, then you should create environments for your Power Apps and Power Automate. How that helps is you can keep different environments different, like developers are developing their app, in dev, and then testers are testing the test in the test environment. Users are testing in UAT environment, and then users are actually using the app in prod environment. So this helps with application lifecycle management really well. So I do recommend, do create environments in your in the Power Platform Admin Center. They do really help with your application lifecycle management. So that, like for example, if you just have one environment, and then it really becomes very difficult to maintain that applications. What if your application goes live, and then you get some changes from the users to implement, and now, like if you do the changes in the Power App, then and you publish it, then those changes go live, and uh, you are not through those cycles, like developers to test it, testers to test it, or users to test it, right? So that poses a risk on the changes that you do in the application. So I do recommend that you do the environments, you create different environments for application lifecycle management. So I've included a link like what are the license requirements in order to use environment in Power Platform. All right, what next? Service account. So we've learned this hard way. So it is very important to use service accounts so that flows in Power Automate and apps in Power Apps are not dependent on a specific user. So it is always like, currently it is recommended that create the app or the flow using a service account, and then share that app or a flow with the author who needs to like develop that app or a flow, so that the ownership of the app or a flow is there with the service account, and the user who may leave the organization, and that user is like terminated after they leave the organization, so that the flow and the app is still in control of service account, not in control of the user who developed the app or the flow. So that is really helpful in terms of using service accounts. For example, let me give you a scenario where if you create approvals in service account, uh, sorry, if you create approvals in Power Automate, when the email for that approval is sent, it would like there would be a line in the approval that this approval is created by so and so user. So that would be like author of the flow. So if you do by service account, it would give the name of service account. But if you create the flow, if any user goes and create the flows, that user's name will appear there. So it's better to always create your flows and apps with service account, and then share with the co-owners, like the users, the actual users who need to develop it. So that way you are making the maintenance of the app easier. Do note that service account will still like need the 365 and 365 license in order to create the app or the flow. All right, what next? So one of the scenarios, like we were implementing the like approvals in Power Automate as part of developing the workflow in Power Automate. Uh, the workflow was developed in Nintex on-prem, but we were converting that workflow, rebuilding that workflow in Power Automate. Now Nintex is like, it's really easy to, in Nintex, it just takes the group name. It could be a SharePoint group or an Office 365 group or Azure Active Directory group. It would take the group name and it would create the tasks for the user, and it would work by default. So you wouldn't need to do any extra work to do that. But like when you are working with Power Automate and creating the approvals using the default actions provided for approvals in Power Automate, what you need to do, if you want to use the group as the approvers, you need to first get the members of that group, and then you need to like build a string with like comma separated names of approvers, and then give that to the assigned to field to assign to field of that approval. So directly a group name here won't work. You need to provide individual users to the assigned to. So that was like one thing we didn't know about. So we figured out while doing this, because like users like when you are doing Power Automate and approvals, which is like a very simple like very common business scenario, and you will end up using groups, right? Because groups are much better in terms of maintenance of permissions and all. So you'll end up using groups most of the times. But now if you're using groups and you want to create approvals, you need to first implement the actions to get the members of that group, build a comma separated email address text string, and then use that string in the assign to property here. So that was one thing that we thought it should be good to use the group here directly, but currently it doesn't allow. All right, so what reminders now, while the users were using Nintex workflows on-prem, Nintex has inbuilt reminder functionality. Like if I'm creating a task for approval, it would have a tab called reminders, and I can configure what reminders needs to be sent and at what timeline. But Power Automate still does not have any reminder functionality for the approval. So we had to like create a separate flow which would like check and which would check the items which are required to send reminders. So we implemented custom logic to determine that, okay, this is the item and it has workflow started on this item since last, for example, 7 days, and the approval has not been received. So we determine those items in our separate flow to get, okay, these are the items which require reminders, and then we were sending the reminders from the separate flow. So one downside of this approach is like you can't send the approval email again here. So the reminder email which will be sent to the user won't be able to like approve or reject from that reminder email. They still need to go to Power Automate or find the old email of approval in order to approve. So that's kind of a downside. I would be looking forward to like do a more sophisticated reminder emails using Power Automate. User can directly act on the approval from the reminder email, which currently is not possible. So you need to implement your own reminder logic when you're working with approvals in Power Automate and you want to send reminders to the user. And also, like if you are using approvals from Power Automate, there is also a possibility to not use Power Automate and use Power App's custom logic to implement approvals. That would also work. So you can skip this, but I hope there would be some improvements for Power Automate approvals. All right, so what's next? One thing that we found that if you want to like update data back to SharePoint from Power Automate, then there are two ways. One is using the update item action. Power Automate has its own update item action for SharePoint, where you can update the data back to SharePoint. The downside of that action is like you need to provide the data for all the mandatory fields. So for example, title, right? Title is the mandatory field for a SharePoint list. And if I don't want to even update the title, it will ask me to provide the value of the title. So I can always provide the old value of the title, but why should I provide it if I don't want to update it, right? In that case, it is really useful to use SharePoint REST API to update the items from Power Automate. So there is an action called send HTTP request to SharePoint. You can call SharePoint REST API, which is kind of fairly simple if you get hold of the syntax. So why that would help, that it would you will be only required to send the column data which you really want to update. So you're not required to send the other column data which you don't want to update. So we found using SharePoint REST API better in this scenario rather than using update item action. So a REST API gives you more flexibility by updating only the field values which you want to update. All right, so what's next? So for like while you are working on flow, like if it turns out to be a fairly large flow, then I would suggest that break down into multiple flows, and then you can use an HTTP action and trigger to like call parent flow, call the child flow from a parent flow. Why I recommend to do this is Power Automate also has limited like action limitation on, though it's a large number, but it has limitations on number of actions you can add to a flow. And it would also, like while you design the flow, and if the flow is way too large, then the designer would also like tend to become slow. So that's why if you build separate logic across flows, then that would be helpful for maintenance of your flows, and also give you a good design experience rather than just doing one large flow for everything. So how you can like call child flow from parent flow in that scenario? So there are two options. One is you can use HTTP action and trigger to call the child flow from the parent flow, but then you need premium connectors because HTTP is a premium connector. So if you are just using Power Automate using the M365 license, you won't have premium connectors. So in that case, you create your flow within a solution, then you get a child flow action to call another child flow from the parent flow. So if you are not using premium connectors, then create the flows in your solution, like have one solution which in which you will have your Power App and all the Power Automate flows which are applicable to that application in one solution. So you group that in one solution, and then any flow within that solution you can call as a child flow. There are some limitations on using solutions, but those are not like world breaking. So you can get through those limitations of using solutions, but helps when you don't have premium connectors to call the parent and child flow. So you can design your flow in a better way when you have logic broken up across the flows, and helps with better maintenance. Otherwise, if you have premium connectors, you can do like HTTP action, call the another flow using HTTP action, and the other HTTP trigger. Okay, so I have commented in my blog, which I'll reference. I have a reference later in the slides. So if you want to go into details on how to implement it. So this is the link to the blog where you can you'll know how to implement reusability in the flow using HTTP actions. All right. One of the limitations, one of the like problem that we faced while doing the approvals within Power Automate is approvals like would when you send an approval to the user would be able to like approve or reject or provide their decision from the email itself, which are that approval email that is sent to the user is called actionable messages. So that allows user to provide the decision on the email itself. They don't like need to click on a link and then link would open in the browser and then provide decision. They would just click a button in their email and then they would be able to approve. But like the customer for whom we did this implementation of Power Automate flows, they were using Mimecast email security, which blocked that actionable messages. So at first, when we implemented approvals and we got these buttons like approve, reject, and hold in the emails. And when we clicked on these buttons, and the buttons were like taking user to the browser, and from it would open Power Automate approvals, and then from browser user was able to like approve or provide that decision. But the customer was looking into like allowing users to approve from the email, and we were like wondering why this is being blocked. And then we figured out that Mimecast email security is blocking it. So we had to like create a exception in Mimecast email security to allow the actionable messages from a specific email address. The specific email address was the email from which this approval email is sent. There is a Microsoft email address from which this approval email is sent. So we had to create an exception in Mimecast security. So for example, if you are getting through this scenario, then you can look into this kind of issue, then you can look into that details, whether any email security is like blocking the actionable messages, and you'll need to create exception in your email security to allow actionable messages. This also like applies to adaptive card scenarios. If you're creating adaptive cards for emails and custom actionable messages, same thing would apply in that scenario as well. So could be useful in that thing as well. All right, so that was about like email security blocking the actionable messages in email. All right, so this was really really interesting lesson learned. So like the flows, the workflows that you develop in Power Automate, they would like run only for 30 days, and if they go beyond 30 days, the flow would time out, and any approvals that might be in progress in that flow instant would also time out. Now, for example, this would be really like business scenario where approval might take more than 30 days. So for example, you have sent an approval request to the user, and user has not responded to the approval request in like 30 days. Okay, and your flow will time out, and then user will not able to approve. So what should you do in that case? So there is also a good reference available from Reza Durrani. He's done a good video on how to like design your flows in how to design your flows that can last beyond 30 days. So in that case, you need to restart your workflow from the place where it left. So you need to implement some custom logic, like store the status of the workflows in your data source, like a SharePoint list, and then restart the workflow from that point. So this video does explain this, like how to do it, and we kind of did a similar with more custom logic, but still there is a possibility on making your flows to last beyond 30 days. So that would be helpful to you. So this is very common scenario. Your flows will go beyond 30 days, and when you are doing Power Automate approvals, this would be really common scenario you will come across, and you can think of it ahead before your user reports it. All right, that were the lessons learned during the migration. Now, what are some pros and cons that we experienced while during this migration? Let me just quickly share that. So, for example, if app or a workflow, like pros of migrating from Nintex to Power Platform. So, if your application or workflow comprises under the license requirements of M365, so you don't have to like spend extra cost in purchasing the license for Power Platform. So in that case, if your business scenario fits in that, you don't need any premium connectors, and your application is simple, then you can develop your application under M365 license. You don't have to spend extra for your license cost. So that is one of the advantage you get in terms of cost if you're doing simple applications with Power Platform. Then we also experienced that Power App's modern UI is better than Nintex classic UI. So for example, if you are like migrating from on-prem to online, then Nintex would have classic UI on the on-prem. And if you migrate to Nintex online, it would have classic UI after migration. Nintex also has a responsive UI functionality, but in that case, you need to rebuild your form in the responsive UI. So again, there would be work required to like do the rebuild. So it depends on your decision whether you want to rebuild in Power Apps or rebuild in Nintex or any other tool. So you'll need to do rebuild work. So you can make a decision there on what tool you want to use again now when you are migrating from on-prem to cloud. Then approvals are like integrated with emails, can be integrated with emails and even Teams, right? So now emails are like old fashioned. You can directly send like approvals on Teams or channels or directly to the user. So Power Automate can easily do that. So that would also provide you an option to implement Teams based approval. So, and also like there is a mobile app for Power Automate, so user can like provide their decisions from the mobile phone itself. So that is one of the advantage of using the approvals from Power Automate. Then if your workflow and the flow is simple, it just takes a couple of days to spin up the app or the flow using Power Automate. So it is really easy to learn building apps in Power Apps and building flows in Power Automate. So the learning curve is not so steep in order to catch up with Power Apps and Power Automate. So we found that helpful. Then with Power Platform, you also get added advantage of AI Builder and Power Virtual Agents. So that way you can implement like AI capabilities for your application. So that's a great added advantage. Like doing chatbots and all would be really easy for you to implement for your application to give some AI power to your apps. Then also one of the things like previously for another project, we've also migrated from Nintex on-prem to Nintex cloud, but for the SharePoint scenario. So for that also we had to like the migration was not seamless. We had a lot of JavaScript code which we had to rewrite, and then there are some functionalities available in on-prem which are not available in online. So we had to redesign some of our workflows to get around those limitations. So it's not like a seamless migration from Nintex on-prem to cloud. So that also does require like good amount of work to make your on-prem workflows and the forms working in the cloud. So that also requires you work. So if you can also think of rebuilding using another tool, which could be like Power Platform. So these are some of the advantages we saw while migrating from Nintex to Power Platform. Then some disadvantages, like not few things, disadvantages you can think of before making a decision, like whether you want to do this migration or not, you want to move to Power Platform or not. So if one of the things that we discussed, that flow starts to grow large in Power Automate, and more users like uses it. There are API request limitations based on the licensing that you are using on the flow, using for the flow. So do refer to that limitations based on the license you want to use for Power Automate. That will make your flow slow. The performance would be dependent on that. So that the licensing related, the performance related to licensing, you should refer before implementing the Power Automate flows. Then flow does not have workflow history. Like for example, if you're coming from Nintex for or SharePoint Designer world, it would have a workflow history list attached to it, and it would give all the audit information of the workflow. Now flow does not have the workflow history. So, and also the whatever history it saves, it just the flow instance is saved, it's just saved for 30 days. And then it would like be removed and you won't be able to reference it. So for audit purpose, if you require workflow history, what will you do, right? So you need to implement logic in your flow to save the workflow history to SharePoint list or to a column in your SharePoint list. Or you can do a separate workflow history list or just have one column to save all the workflow history of that specific item. So you need to build like extra logic for doing the workflow history using flows. For the audit purpose, like some applications would require auditing to be referred later for the apps. Then on the 30-day limitation of the flow, that Power Automate flow won't last beyond 30 days. So still there are some workarounds to make it last more than 30 days, but still you need to implement that logic and take care of it before making your flow live for the users. Then, as we discussed, Canvas app does not have a repeating table control. So you need to do a lot of work to implement the repeating table logic. And if it has complex fields like a person or a group or a taxonomy field, it makes it a little more difficult as well. And you also need to implement custom logic to save that repeating table data to your data source, and then again load that data in your repeating table. So you need to do some custom logic to do that. All right. So that were about the pros and cons of moving from any other tool to Power Platform. All right. But overall, we found that we made this scenario working for our customer, and currently it is working great for them. And we did face some bumps, but we were able to find solutions and made the app working for our customer. So like our customer is happy with Power Platform. So some points to consider when you're making a decision from moving from one tool to another, especially when you're doing forms or workflows. So for first, the form points. One is some non-technical points you need to think about. One is user experience. Now, if you see you are migrating from InfoPath to Power Apps, there would be user experience changes, right? Of course, good changes, because InfoPath is kind of an old technology, so it wouldn't give pleasing, nice, attractive UI, which you can do in Power Apps. So there would be user experience changes. As there would be user experience changes, the user would require training to use that new user experience. So you need to think about user training. Then licensing cost, of course, when you move from one tool to another, what are the new license cost of new tool and what is the cost of existing tool? Compare it and then make a decision. Then whether you have a development team or you have a power user or business user who is developing the apps in the tool that you decide. So consider your team capabilities, on what they are familiar with. Then overall business process. For example, you are working for a customer to implement the forms and the business processes. Now you need to think like, how would you do all of the business processes and the forms? Like, you want to do just one app, or you want to do all the applications that customer wants to implement in one tool, or use different tools for different apps, and how that fits in that budget. So all those things you need to consider before choosing a tool. Then some technical, especially for the Power Platform, is repeating tables. How much, if you have a lot of repeating tables and complex forms, then you need to learn like how to implement repeating tables in Power Apps. There is a lot of content available in the community, so it shouldn't be difficult to implement it. Then responsive design. So there recently I saw a lot of content shared in the community on how to implement responsive design for Power Apps. So that should be difficult now. And there are also like community controls which are available on GitHub. A lot of content available there. You can directly use from there the components. And then make a decision whether you want to do list forms or Canvas app or model-driven apps, based on which that would be the first step on what you want to do, what you want to develop, right? So your design considerations would be based on that. And then we talked about attachments, like if your forms or application has attachments, how we are going to deal with the attachments, and how we are going to save the attachments, what data you want to save for attachments. So it needs to be considered of. I saw one comment, yes, there are limitations on the attachment size. I don't remember the number, but I think it's kind of around 50 MB or so. But there is attachment limitation on what you can handle from Power Apps and Power Automate. Size of the file. All right. Then same way, points that you need to consider while migrating from one workflow tool to another. The same thing, user experience like approvals. If you're doing approvals from SharePoint Designer workflow or Nintex, it would like take user to SharePoint task where they can approve or reject. And the Power Automate has a different approval experience that user get. So that requires user training, as there would be changes in the user experience. Then of course licensing, how much the tool costs, right? Same development team, like how experienced your team is in building the workflows using that specific tool. And then overall business processes, whether you just need one business process to implement it in Power Automate, or it is a lot of applications you want to do in Power Automate. And then some non-technical, especially for Power Automate, like workflow history is not provided by Power Automate flows, so implement your own business logic to implement workflow history. Approvals, like approvals which last beyond 30 days, you need to handle that separately. Then tasks are not stored in SharePoint as opposed to like as opposed to Nintex, and how you would handle tasks from Power Automate. So you need to think about that. Then Nintex workflows also provide you like state machine, like out-of-box state machine logic to handle different states. You need to add your own logic to do state machine workflows in Power Automate. Of course, this is possible to do, but you need to create your own logic. So that is one thing that you need to think about on how would you do it in Power Automate. All right. So that was about some points to consider when you move from one tool to another for forms and the workflows. All right. So these are some references you can refer to. I referred in my session. So one is, I also have a detailed blog post written on this migration scenario when we migrated from on-prem to online, Nintex on-prem to Power Platform, and then some limitations and guidelines related to the licensing, and some comparisons of Nintex on-prem to online. Like I said, there is lot of work involved after, even when you migrate from Nintex on-prem to online. So that some help on that. All right. Yeah. Thank you for joining this session. I am on time, but I'll still quickly go through the questions if I can answer, or I'll type in the chat window if I'm beyond the time.
So much, Anna, for that very, very comprehensive session. You covered a lot of ground there. I think there is one question about encryption with SharePoint. I think it's the only question that's outstanding, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw that question. Should I read it out?
Yeah, if you could, I'll have to scroll to that question.
Yeah.
If you could read it out, yeah.
Sure. So it's a question, it's by Pranam, who's asking, how would Power Automate, Power Apps handle encrypted data to and from SharePoint? Have you come across this scenario?
So I have come across a scenario for Power Automate where, for example, I had to use for Graph API, I had to use client ID and secret to call the Graph API from Power Automate. But now I wanted to keep that client ID and client secret secure in my Power Automate, so user can't see that from the flow run. So there is an option to secure input and output in the actions of Power Automate. So you could use that. So whenever the user sees the flow run, they don't see the values of that variables or whatever you are using in the Power Automate action. So that is one scenario that I have come across. I haven't come across like encryption scenario in Power Automate, but yeah, I'll look into it, and if I find anything, I can share with Pranam, and I'll share my thoughts once I get my head around it. But I haven't come that scenario before.
Well, Anna, look, this was a very comprehensive session. You covered a lot, so I really, really, really appreciate that. Please, could you share your contact details for the community so the community can connect with you in the chat? Please share your blog, your social, because I'm sure all the community want to connect with you. I think you are a future superstar for the Power Platform community. So thanks again, Anna.
Yeah, thank you for all the attendees to getting through this session, and I hope you find some value out of it. Thank you
And
to the
on that
organizers and
note,
sponsors. Yeah.
fantastic, Anna. Yep. And on that note, guys, there is an open source tool. I don't know if anyone's tried using it, that actually converts your Nintex workflows into Power Automate. I haven't tested it myself. I don't know how effective it is, but I'm sure some of you are going to are thinking about how do you convert your workflows. Final thought from Anna. This is a final thought from Anna. Anna, what's your opinion? Is it a good idea to automatically convert your workflows into Power Automate, or should they be done manually? What are your thoughts?
So I need to check that tool. Unfortunately, I haven't checked it, but I would at least give it a try. If it like does like 20 or 30% work for me, that would be helpful at least, right? And if that tool becomes famous, then at least I think the tool will do 50 to 60% work in coming future. So I would at least give it a try. Whatever time it saves for me would be helpful.
Good point, Anna. And
Yeah.
just to finish off on that point, all the things that, all the practices and patterns that Anna mentioned today, they also need to be implemented. And I don't believe a tool exists that also incorporates those principles as well, but just for information for the community, really. So again,